That's... Aryna, that's crazy.
That was my moment. It was so much fun. You know what? It's so funny actually, guys.
Before we get into this, let me ask you something. When was the last time a 19-year-old walked into a tournament ranked 140th in the world and left having beaten 3 Grand Slam champions? Not 1, 3 in a row, without dropping a set. Because that is exactly what Alex Eala did in Miami, and the tennis world has been quietly rearranging itself around that fact ever since. This is not a story about an upset. Upsets happen every week on tour. This is a story about a shift, the kind that does not show up cleanly on a leaderboard but that everyone inside the sport can feel happening. And at the center of it sits one of the most psychologically revealing weeks in recent WTA history, a week in Rome where the world number 1 came completely undone while a teenage wildcard from the Philippines was busy doing something nobody expected on the other side of the same complex. Let's go back to Miami first, because you cannot understand Rome without it. Eala arrived at the Miami Open in March 2025 as a wildcard. No pressure, no expectations, no spotlight. Just a 19-year-old from the Philippines who had been grinding through the lower levels of the tour and somehow earned herself a spot in the main draw of one of the biggest hardcourt events outside the Grand Slams. What happened next was not a fluke. In her very first match, she faced Jelena Ostapenko, a former Roland Garros champion, a player who can dismantle anyone on a good day. Eala was down 4-0 in the first set. Most players at 140 in the world, in their first big tournament appearance, fold in that moment. She did not fold. She came back and won. Then she beat Madison Keys, the reigning Australian Open champion, 6-4, 6-2. Not a tight 3-setter, not a lucky escape. She dismantled a Grand Slam champion in straight sets and became the first Filipino player in the Open era to beat a Slam winner at tour level. Then she beat EJ Swiatek, coming back from 4-2 down in the second set to close it out cleanly. 3 Grand Slam champions. 3 straight set victories. 1 tournament. Nobody in WTA history had ever done that as a wild card. She jumped from 140 in the world to 75 overnight. She became the first Filipino player to crack the top 100. She reached the semifinals, where she pushed Jessica Pegula, one of the most experienced players on tour, to 3 sets in a match that finished after midnight. Pegula needed everything she had to survive it and admitted as much when the cameras were still rolling. Eala lost. But losing at midnight in a semifinal to a top 5 player after all of that is not a defeat. It is a statement. And Aryna Sabalenka was watching. She had to be watching because Sabalenka was also at Miami, also winning, completing what the tennis world calls the sunshine double by taking both the Indian Wells and Miami titles. By every measurable standard, the tournament belonged to Sabalenka. She won it. But something else was happening in the stands and in the broadcast booths and on social media, something she could not win by hitting a better backhand. The narrative had shifted. Tournament director James Blake had openly moved matches to center court because of Eala's global following, because her games were drawing the kind of atmosphere that felt like a home crowd in the middle of Florida. Sabalenka, the defending champion, the player who had just won the thing, had been publicly vocal about scheduling decisions being made in the wild card's favor. That tension, that subtle friction between the queen of the sport and the teenager the crowd had chosen to adore, that was the real match playing out beneath the results. And it had not finished yet. By the time Rome arrived in May, Eala had made a deliberate decision. She skipped a lower-tier clay event in Catalonia entirely. She was not using Rome as a warm-up or a rhythm-finding exercise. She had circled it on the calendar. She wanted to compete there. She had been placed in Sabalenka's half of the draw, and the tennis world started quietly doing the arithmetic. In the days before the tournament, both players were hitting with the same American practice partner, Iva Jovic, on consecutive days at the Foro Italico. One day it was Eala's session. The next day it was Sabalenka's. 2 players from completely different positions in the sport's hierarchy, preparing for the same draw, separated by 24 hours on the same court. The setup felt cinematic. And then the draw started and immediately everything went sideways. Marta Kostyuk walked onto the court in round 1 and played the match of her life. She beat Eala 6-0, 6-1 in just over an hour. Eala won 0 break points. She won barely 17% of her return points. She could not find a foothold anywhere on the clay. It looked, on paper, like an exposure. Like the Miami run had been the anomaly and Rome was the correction. Except that framing ignores something crucial. Kostyuk had arrived in Rome as the freshly crowned Madrid Open champion. She was not just in good form. She was in the form of her career. After dismantling Eala, she beat Daria Kasatkina, then Leylah Fernandez, then walked into a round of 16 match against Sabalinka herself. And here is where the numbers tell a different story than the headlines. Sabalenka, world number 1, 9-match WTA 1000 winning streak, needed 2 hours and 5 minutes to beat Kostyuk 6-1, 7-6. She faced 12 break points before Kostyuk finally converted her 13th. Kostyuk led 5-3 in the second set and served for it. Sabalenka had to break back, survive a set point in the tiebreak, and only closed it out on her third match point with a drop shot. The same player who ended Eala's tournament in 62 minutes had pushed the greatest player in the world to the absolute limit of 2 sets. That context does not make Eala's loss disappear. But it makes the narrative that she was simply exposed look a lot more like laziness than analysis. Because Eala had not been beaten by an average opponent having a decent day. She had been beaten by a player operating at a level that was making everyone's life difficult that week. And Eala was not done in Rome. She still had the doubles draw. Partnered for the first time with Coco Gauff, the two of them opened with a comfortable win, then followed it with another in the round of 16. That set up a quarterfinal against Jasmine Paolini and Sara Errani, the defending doubles champions, two players who had spent careers mastering clay court doubles, playing at home, with an entire Italian stadium behind them. Eala and Gauff led 5-3 in the first set with a 40-0 lead on serve. The veterans clawed it back. Eala and Gauff dominated the second set to level things. The super tiebreak went the distance before Paolini and Errani eventually held on, 7-5, 3-6, 10-7, in 1 hour and 39 minutes. A teenager who had been blanked in singles on day 1 had pushed two of the most decorated doubles players in the world to a super tiebreak in the quarterfinals on day 8 in front of a crowd that was absolutely not cheering for her. That image did not get the coverage it deserved. But on the same afternoon that Eala and Gauff were grinding through that doubles quarterfinal, something was happening on Campo Central that would define Sabalenka's entire 2025 season. Young Qinwen walked out for her quarterfinal against Sabalenka carrying a head-to-head record of 0 wins and 6 losses against the world number 1. Sabalenka had beaten her in the 2024 Australian Open final. She had beaten her in Miami just weeks before Rome, extending that record to 6-0. On paper, this was the most predictable result of the draw. What happened instead was clinical. Jung won 82% of her first service points. She saved all 5 break points she faced. Every time Sabalenka generated pressure, Jung absorbed it and answered. The final score was 6-4, 6-3 in 97 minutes. Jung's first career win over the world number 1. And then, with the match already gone, with the crowd buzzing and Sabalenka's composure crumbling point by point, a spectator somewhere in the stands decided to lean in and shout across the court, "Come on, Aryna, play tennis." What happened next was broadcast to millions of people. Sabalenka turned toward the stands and at full volume told the spectator exactly what she thought of that contribution, in language that left absolutely nothing open to interpretation. The chair umpire issued a code violation immediately. No deliberation, no warning first. The whole thing, the outburst, the code violation, the stunned silence that followed, it traveled around the internet within hours. And here is where I want to slow down for a moment, because the easy version of this story is to laugh at it or to reduce it to a clip. But what actually happened in that moment is more interesting than the clip. Sabalenka is not a player who loses control without reason. She is one of the most mentally resilient athletes in the sport. She had carried herself through a season that had already required enormous emotional discipline. But Rome exposed something. Not a weakness in her game. A fracture in how she was processing the changing shape of her season. Because the scheduling friction from Miami had not been resolved quietly. It had lingered. The crowd in Rome had arrived already tilted toward Eala, and Sabalenka had noticed that too. When you are the world number one and you walk into a tournament and the atmosphere is already oriented around someone else, that is a different kind of pressure. It does not show up in a stat sheet. It accumulates. And then Young Chinwon played the match of her life and the crowd kept buzzing and something finally gave way. A fan said 5 words and Sabalenka said 3 back, and suddenly the whole weight of that accumulated tension was visible to everyone watching. The regret came almost immediately. And it did not stay contained to Rome. Weeks later Sabalenka reached the Roland Garros final and lost to Coco Gauff in 3 sets. What happened in the press conference afterward became one of the most talked about moments of the entire tennis year. She told reporters that Gauff had not won because she had played extraordinary tennis but because Sabalenka herself had made every mistake. She said Swiatek would have beaten Gauff if Swiatek had reached the final instead. She called it the worst final she had ever played. The backlash was global and immediate. Gauff, still holding the trophy, pushed back directly in her own press conference and said plainly that she simply did not agree. The story did not stop there. Sabalenka spent weeks in damage control. She wrote a private apology letter to Gauff. She sat down with a European broadcaster and said her behavior had been completely unprofessional, that she had let her emotions override everything, that she needed time to go back and look at it honestly before she could accept how badly she had handled it. She said she had reached out personally to make sure Gauff understood that the respect was real and that the title was absolutely deserved. Then, just before Wimbledon, both players posted videos together, laughing, dancing, closing the chapter publicly. And at Wimbledon, when Sabalenka lost her semi-final and walked into the press conference, the very first thing she said, unprompted, before a single question had been asked, was a joke referencing Roland Garros. The room laughed. She laughed. But the fact that she brought it up herself in the first breath tells you more than the joke did. You do not make that reference unless the wound is still real. Rome sits at the beginning of all of that. Not as a cause, exactly, but as the moment where the internal tension first surfaced in public. While Sabalenka was unraveling on Campo Central, Eala was on another court in the same complex, fighting for every point in a doubles match nobody had circled on their calendar. 2 completely different responses to pressure playing out simultaneously in the same tournament. One ended with a code violation and a quarter-final exit. The other ended with a super tiebreak loss that somehow felt like a win. Eala never responded publicly to any of it. Not the scheduling controversy, not the crowd dynamics, not the noise around Sabalenka's comments. She gave interviews about staying present, about what it means to represent Filipino tennis on the biggest stages, about the process of learning clay court tennis at 19 years old. The contrast between how these 2 players moved through adversity in Rome was not subtle, and it was not accidental. It reflected something deeper about where each of them was mentally in that moment. Sabalenka is still the best player in the world. That is not the argument here, and it never was. The argument is simpler than that. Dominance in tennis is not purely technical. The scoreboard measures one thing. The full picture of a tournament week measures something else entirely. In Rome in May 2025, the full picture showed a world number 1 whose composure had a ceiling she had not previously been forced to find, and a 19-year-old wildcard who had already found her floor and was quietly building everything above it. Sabalenka took Rome into Paris. Paris followed her all the way to Wimbledon. And Eala kept climbing, match by match, tournament by tournament, without a single press conference to walk back or an apology letter to write. The scoreboard reset after Rome the way it always does. But the players carry what happened in those weeks with them long after the clay has been cleared away. That is what made Rome different. Not the results. What the results revealed.